Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. And this is Andrew Darling. And Andrew, first of all, as being a veteran, thanks so much for your service and thanks for coming on the program. Really appreciate that.
No, I definitely appreciate your support.
All right, so let's kick this around. So, first of all, can you tell the viewers a little bit about you besides maybe the stuff that I just said?
Yeah, so I was born out in Brevard County, out in Titusville. I grew up here in Orlando, in Orange County. Graduated from Oak Ridge High School, proud graduate from the Orange County public school system. I spent 7.5 years in the Army, deployed to Iraq twice. That's also where I met my beautiful wife. And she is actually still in the Army. So I like to joke about it. I say, listen, I have all the benefits I had when I was in the Army. I just don't have to get up and go do PT in the morning. So I worked quite a few jobs after I got out of the Army. Everything from selling cars to being a personal injury paralegal. When I got out of the Army in 2011, I had an associate's degree. So I worked really hard. I got my bachelor's. I got a master's in human resources. And then I went to law school. And I finished law school down at the University of Miami. And I graduated in 2018. And I really started to think about how is it that I can impact the greatest number of people, particularly in my home county. And that led me to a primary where I came in second out of 5. And I feel like I got a strong progressive criminal justice reform message out there. And now it's just a matter to see what the incumbent does with it.
So my thing is, why sheriff? I mean, we went to school to be a lawyer, but why sheriff? Why not, a state rep or a state senator? Why that?
So for me, there are certain constitutional offices, right? Your sheriffs, your property appraisers, your supervisor of elections, that these individuals have some of the most power and the most influence on the areas that they're in the counties that they supervise. And a sheriff is probably the most powerful person in a county. And I don't mean that in like terms of most powerful elected official. No, like literally more powerful than the county mayor. Because if the sheriff says, we're no longer arresting for drug offenses, period, there's nothing the mayor can do. There's nothing the state attorney can do. The only person that can do anything is the governor if they want to remove a sheriff. And I mean, we've only seen that a couple instances, throughout the history of Florida, where the governor is just not in a position to remove elected officials.
Well, and I want to dive into quite a few police issues. And with that, and we see that before we even get into that, Andrew, my thing is, you were out of the box guy. You had very progressive values. You were running against the establishment and a person that was already a police chief in general. I believe he was in Orlando too. He was the Orlando police chief before.
Yes. Yeah. He was the police chief of OPD for 3 or 4 years. And then he'd been the sheriff for 2 years because he was finishing the term of now Mayor Jerry Demings.
So you're running against the establishment, which it's already hard enough to run in any kind of elected position, to run against an establishment person. So what issues did you run into when running against the police establishment in general?
So for me, the biggest issue in any election where you're coming and trying to change the status quo is voter education. You don't have the time to educate voters unless you can raise a significant amount of money. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of times folks don't talk about is these constitutional offices, while the salary is pretty good, I think the sheriff makes about $175,000 a year, which is a substantial salary. But that also means that the qualifying fee to qualify for the ballot is over $10,000. It's $10,694.22. And the only reason I remember that is because it's the largest check I've ever written in my life. Well, that's the biggest issue that I had was, so I raised about $42,000. $7,000 of that was my own money. So you figure I raised about $35,000. Well, the qualifying fee is more than $10,000. Well, that brings me down to $25,000.
Right.
I paid a finance team. I paid staffers probably a total of $15,000. So that means I have what, $10,000 to reach out to voters, to buy signs, to, pay for email, to pay for voter contact. That's just not going to get it done when your opponent raises $340,000.
Wow. Let's dive into some policing issues. So we hear with the Black Lives Matter protests, and I guess we'll kick it off with that. Obviously, that started with George Floyd, but this stuff has been going on from years upon years on end with the systematic racism in this country. What does Black Lives Matter mean to you, Andrew?
So what it means to me is that for literally the entire history of this country, we have not valued Black life at the level that we value white folks. We just haven't. And I am as Caucasian as the next dude. And for me, I mean, my wife is a first generation immigrant from Ghana in West Africa. My children are biracial. So like, it's not just me standing up here trying to be some proud progressive. Oh no, I have skin in the game, right? Like how my son is treated, how my daughter is treated, how my wife is treated are directly impact me. And for me, Black Lives Matter is not just a statement. It's a proclamation, right? It is that Black lives are as valuable as anybody else's life. And it's not taking the time to, just talk about sort of the movement and then even the protests with the George Floyd. I mean, I was out at those protests. I have a really cool video where it's from the like West Channel 2's helicopter. And it's a picture of me. I tend to, when I go out to these protests, I wear like a white shirt because it's just a little more, it's easier to point me out in a crowd when you're the guy in, decent pants and a full length white shirt. And I'm walking between police and protesters. And like, you can see me from the helicopter walking back and forth, like talking to the protesters, talking to law enforcement, like, listen, like, we're fine. We're good. There's no need to. And like, you watch law enforcement shaking their cans of pepper spray, putting on their gas mask, doing things that I learned and that I trained people in the Army, where you use your posture, you get tall, you get big, you get broad shoulders, so you look bigger than you are. And it's something that law enforcement does regularly, and we don't talk about it. But Black Lives Matter is incredibly important to me. I had an opportunity actually to meet one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and while I wouldn't say I'm as far left as she is, Miss Alicia Garza. She was phenomenal. She's incredibly smart. She understands these issues in a way that, as a straight white man, there's just certain things I'm never going to get, right? But I'm going to make every effort that I can, and I'm going to do everything that I can to push this movement forward.
Well, my thing is, if we can't respect Black lives, then how can we say that all lives matter if we can't start with Black people who were the first people? Well, Native Americans were, but we don't even respect them, period. It's really disgraceful what goes on with them. But us, how we've been disrespectful to the Native American community and also the Black community, as them coming over on ships and being slaves, and they still don't get the respect that they deserve, not only by the police, but we look at voting rights, we look at environmental issues where they're basically put in these communities where they're toxic wastelands, as Flint and many other communities all around the country. So as we keep going into this subject, Andrew, what do you say to these people? And there's a lot of them around, and some are, progressive, some are not, on the conservative spell, which they say, well, why do people just say Black Lives Matter? Why don't you just say all lives matter? They don't basically get what what I just said to you, that we can't say all lives matter until we respect Black people in general.
Yeah, so it's the first time I heard Black Lives Matter back in 2012, after we lost Trayvon Martin. Like there was an implied two, like TOO, like Black Lives Matter 2.
Right.
Like that's implied, like that's part of it. And the All Lives Matter crowd, like it's so frustrating because like at this point, most of the time, it's not people who are making an argument in good faith, right? If you're making an argument in good faith and you're saying, well, of course, Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. And then you're like, oh, okay, now you get it.
Right.
Black lives do matter because you're saying all lives matter. But by simply saying all lives matter, like I'm to the point now where I just don't believe people are making, particularly conservative folks, you're not making a good faith argument.
You feel like that's a dog whistle? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it is you're not making a good faith effort to understand the argument, because that's going to take more of your, cognitive abilities to understand than it is to just stand there with everybody you already agree with and just say all lives matter.
So you were in Orlando, you were at these protests. Did you see a lot of these things? I know you said you were going back and forth between the police and the protesters trying to keep that peace. What happened in those protests that you were at in Orlando?
So for me, I mean, I represented 20 of the peaceful protesters that were arrested pro bono in my law firm. And as part of that, like I onboarded during the summer, I onboarded 12 interns, a combination of law school students, college students, just some, professional folks that wanted to help out and volunteer their time. And every single one of those cases was dismissed. And one of the bigger issues that we have when it comes to these protests is protests are protected speech until it feels like the protest inconveniences the establishment. And it's one of the things that very quickly, particularly in Orlando, where we have a history of violent police action against the community, we have seen that OPD and the sheriff's office do not care about whether they are lawfully or unlawfully arresting somebody. What they care about is ending the protest for that day and then moving on to the next day. And if everything gets dismissed, it gets dismissed. Who cares? That day is solved.
Yeah.
And that's not the way we need to be looking at these problems.
Well, I'm worried about now. We talk about protected speech and protests in general. Not only we go back to when the president was in D.C. when he walked in, held the Bible, and they basically rammed through all these protesters. Some people even lost their eyesight, that they were shot with rubber bullets, which is extremely scary. But not just that, we see our governor Ron DeSantis. I call him DeSantis because he's killing everybody in sight with the coronavirus. But he's meeting with Grady Judd over in Polk County and trying to pass laws to, block protests, to try to jail protesters in general. So what can we do? As you are a lawyer and you obviously know a lot about policing in general, what is going on with something like that, where he's trying to pass these laws to, really curb freedom of speech in general?
So all these things that the governor is doing are dog whistles for the election. Governor DeSantis doesn't care about whether there's enhanced penalties for groups of 7 or more people who happen to be together and then some crime happens, right? Like, he doesn't care about that. He doesn't care at all. And he's a lawyer, so he knows none of that is going to pass any sort of constitutional muster. So it's not going to be legal under the U.S. Constitution. And it's certainly not going to be legal under the Constitution of the state of Florida. So it's dog whistle politics. It's right before an election. That's what he's good at. If you remember, the day he became the nominee, the first thing he said was, we got to make sure that we don't monkey this up.
Yes.
Talking about Andrew Gillum. That was his first, 12 hours after becoming the nominee. And full disclosure here, I did work on the Gillum campaign, so I am still a little bitter about that. But he doesn't care about that. He cares about getting the type of people who don't want more education, who want this, let's go back to the 50s when white people had every opportunity. That's what a lot of his supporters want. Yeah. Now, there are some supporters that I've even talked to who are Republicans who they'll hold their nose and vote for DeSantis. They'll hold their nose and vote for Trump because they care about the courts. And they care about the things that they're able to do in the courts for the next 50 years. And frankly, it almost doesn't matter what progressives do. Even if Biden wins this election, and even if he puts a bunch of progressive staples throughout his cabinet, the courts are gone for the next generation or two.
I agree. Trump really, that was one thing that he did get through for conservatives. He loaded he's not only doing the Supreme Court, but also the federal courts, and even under that, it's loaded with conservative judges. So I agree with that.
All the district courts of appeal, all the federal circuit judges, he's loaded up on young ideological folks that even the American Bar Association, for a lot of them, was like, yeah, they're not qualified.
So let's finish this off. So I do want to ask some stuff about policing. So when people say defund the police,
Mhm.
My thing with defund the police is, Andrew, is that I'm saying not defund the whole police. I'm saying the police, a lot of these police departments get, tons and tons of dollars. Spend that on getting these social workers. So, the social worker can come and de-escalate a situation if somebody does have some sort of mental issues.
Mhm.
Also, put some of this money into the community for community programs, maybe with the police, so they can learn the police officers that police their community. So if something happens, they're not afraid to talk to these police officers. Do you agree with that? Or what is your position on defunding the police?
So I think oftentimes, we ask for criminal justice reform, right?
Right.
And we don't get specific.
Right.
And because we don't get specific and we don't get loud, we don't get anybody's attention. But when you say defund the police, oh, everybody's paying attention now. And it's an opportunity. So defund the police and abolish the police are different things. They're very different. Some of the things that I proposed doing was, instead of hiring the next 10 deputies, how about we hire a combination of social workers, mental health professionals, and addiction specialists? And then we always have somebody in every sector who can go with law enforcement and be the first responders. Obviously, if there's a security issue, if there's a safety issue, yes, law enforcement needs to be there. Like, there's even folks like us on the left that are pretty progressive. We're not arguing law enforcement doesn't need to be there if there's potential danger. Of course they do. What we're arguing is that for every single situation, somebody with a high school diploma or an associate's degree might not be the best person to respond to that scenario. So if you have somebody who has an addiction issue, John Q. Deputy, who has, an associate's degree in criminal justice, might not be the best person to respond to somebody who's going through withdrawal symptoms. They might not be the best person to respond to a family who has, a mentally ill young person, and mom and dad are fighting because they don't know how to take care of the young person. Like, they're just not prepared, but we ask them to go do everything. And part of defunding the police is not taking away all of their budget. It's making sure they're allocating those budgets in ways that actually make our community safer, reduce recidivism, and give people an opportunity to be successful in their life.
So to go into that, do you agree with this statement? And I just think that this is the way we kind of really get rid of crime in general, because I believe crime goes up because we look at the affordable housing epidemic just in Orlando, but all over the country. People don't have good paying jobs. We don't have universal health care, or health care that's even affordable for most people. And the environment that a lot of these people live in, there's no clean air and clean water. I feel like if we fix these issues, the crime would go significantly down, way, way down. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. There's crime. So here's the thing. 1 to 3% of criminals are going to be criminals no matter how good they are financially, no matter what their opportunities are. There's just, and it's not like a gene thing. Like, there's nobody is, genetically programmed to be a criminal, right?
Right.
But there are going to be folks who commit crime, whether it's organized crime, whether it's street level stuff, whether it's white collar crime. It's just going to happen. And that's not a dependent on a socioeconomic status. The issue that we run into is, particularly here in Orlando, right now, the FBI recently came in. I think they announced it yesterday or the day before. The FBI has come in because we've had two gangs warring against each other, and the sheriff's office can't seem to get it under control.
No.
They can't get it under control because they don't have relationships in the community. And like, the issue that we're having is here, because of the lack of affordable housing, instead of having a gang in a neighborhood and another gang in another neighborhood and another gang in another neighborhood, well, these two neighborhoods, they're not affordable anymore. So now everybody's in this neighborhood, and everybody who grew up not liking each other, who went to different schools, whose brothers and uncles and fathers and everybody else didn't like each other, now they all live next to each other. Like, what did you think was going to happen when there was only one affordable place to live? And the fact that our sheriff can't seem to figure that out and do anything about it, that the FBI has to step in, I mean, I think that tells you everything we need to know about his level of competence.
How do we fix these issues of, and I believe a lot of this stuff happens because like you said, the confidence level of the people in charge. How do we fix a lot of these issues with, people getting along with police, learning the policemen, men that are, and women that are on the beat in their neighborhoods?
Yeah, the biggest issue that I had specifically with the protest related stuff was it was the law enforcement officers more than the protesters that were escalating the tensions. And like there's part of it, and like I understand the mentality, having been in the military, having been in combat. Like I get it. There's a part of folks when you are part of a military or paramilitary organization, it's sort of that old like sports analogy, like let's get some, right? Like I have an opportunity to get some. And if you're in your fully protective gear and you're like, you know what? One of these young idiot protesters is going to say something or do something or get too close or touch my shoulder. And I don't often get the opportunity to just slam the hell out of people. Well, you know what? Let's get some. And that's the mentality of far too many officers instead of what can I do to de-escalate the situation? And part of the problem is a lot of them do not have that skill set. That's a skill set. Being able to have a conversation and de-escalate stuff is a skill set. And a lot of our officers and deputies just don't have it.
But is that because a lot of the officers and deputies did not grow up in the city of Orlando? They do not know the people that lived in these neighborhoods.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like I grew up near Orange Blossom Trail in Americana, which in Orlando is probably still considered a pretty rough neighborhood. But that's fine, right? Like it was in the early 2000s when I lived there. It was part of the like deadliest 4 or 5 square mile area in the state of Florida. So worse than down in Miami, worse than up in Duval County in Jacksonville, worse than down in Tampa and St. Pete. Like it was a rough area, but like that's home. That's where I grew up. So I can still go to that area, walk around. And that was one of the things that I try to tell people is I don't need a badge and gun to walk around any of the neighborhoods here in Orange County because I am 2 or 3 people at most away from knowing mutual friends, right? Like I've walked around some of these neighborhoods. I still go and play basketball at some of the old places I played growing up because, well, I did pre-pandemic, not so much now, but like, and I don't go there for campaign stops. I don't go there for my business. I go there because that's my home. And that's where I'm from. And that's where I grew up. So, I mean, the relationships are where the sheriff is lacking. It is where the Orlando police chief is lacking. And I don't know how you fix that unless you already have those relationships.
Yeah, I remember that too. I heard that a lot too. Can we talk about this? Because I was a huge Andrew Gillum guy. I do want to get back to that, but since you brought up Andrew, I met him 3 times in Orlando, actually. And it was so funny because, and I'll tell you this too, and I interviewed Sean Shaw this, and I told him this too. I said, I never met a politician that I met. Now, it was 3 consecutive days in a row, but regardless, he remembered my name, remembered what I was wearing. I said, geez, this guy, I've met quite a few politicians, but I've never been so impressed besides Andrew. What was it like working with Andrew and for Andrew in general?
No, so listen, it was amazing. I mean, for me, he has been much more of a mentor to me since the campaign. And it's just having the conversations, the trying to understand the public life side of it. But during the campaign, I mean, I volunteered during the primary. So if you were here when he was in Orlando, it was probably like the UCF event where Bernie was here.
I went to the Bernie one, and then there was another one. It was at a black bar or something like that.
Yeah, it was a wine bar, like right in Metro West. Yeah, I was there for that too.
And then there was another one where he drove into an early voting location in the primary. It was at some library. God, I forget what the name of it is.
It's near Carver Shores and Richmond Heights.
You're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I think it's called the West Oaks Library. No, it's not the West Oaks Library.
It's something west. It sounds something.
Yeah. So it was phenomenal. I mean, I was very fortunate during the campaign. I worked for the campaign manager directly. I also was the operations manager for the campaign headquarters here in Orlando. So I spent a lot of time with lots of folks on the staff. And then after the election, I was part of the sort of shutdown team, getting the 76 offices closed. I was the director of operations for that. But I spent a lot of time with Mayor Gillum. And I will say this, like Mayor Gillum, I consider him a mentor of mine. I mean, I consider him a friend. Like he is the type of person that he has your back, right? Like if he knows you and he knows that you're there for him, like he's there for you. And I've seen politicians who have cut folks off, who have, made the
Right.
political decision.
Yeah.
And listen, there are times where you have to do that, but I've seen Andrew Gillum more times than not stand up for his friends. And I was so incredibly disappointed when so many people sort of turned their back on him at the first sign of controversy. And, I care a lot about Mayor Gillum. I think he's an incredible person. I hope he gets back into public life at some point.
Right.
But I care mostly about his health and his family and making sure, RJ and the kids are good. I mean, they're a fantastic family. And I sure hope we haven't seen the last of them.
I agree 100%. He's a great man. When you talk about controversy, are you talking about what happened in Miami, or are we talking about the FBI stuff? What were you talking about?
Yeah, so I think there was some comments after the election about what campaign funds he did or didn't spend, where he spent them.
With John
And
Morgan. Right.
yeah, and
Okay.
then the FBI controversy, which the FBI knew before the election that all the stuff that was going on in Tallahassee, that he wasn't a target of that. But
Right.
because it was 90 days to the election, they weren't going to say anything. And Governor DeSantis knew that, but he didn't give a shit. He kept running those negative ads. And then the stuff that happened in Miami, listen, like he came out, he said that he had an issue. He was going to work on treatment and all that. But just the pure, like, oh, I knew he wasn't going to do this. I knew he wasn't good. I knew he wasn't like, first of all, who the heck are any of us to talk about who anybody else is? Like we're perfect. So I spent quite a bit of time, just talking about, and of course, because folks knew that I was close to him, like, I had a bunch of pictures with him and I on Facebook and whatnot. Folks were reaching out to me, and it's like, listen, like if you're reaching out to me to ask, oh, what's up with your boy? Like, first of all, he was the Democratic nominee for governor in the state of Florida. Like, that's not my boy. We are not on the same level. And, it was worth the pushback for me, because when there are folks that I care about, whether it's somebody I've known since I was a kid, since you're growing up in school, or whether it's somebody who's came in and had a positive impact on my life, like when I tell you I got you, like I'm there for you. And I'm going to do whatever I can to support you, even when you're struggling. And too often we forget that politicians are regular people too. And they have their own struggles and their own things to fight. And if you're not going to stand with them, then what was the point of standing with them before?
Right. Do you feel like it was a bad decision to bring Chris King on the campaign? He only got 1,000 some odd votes in the. I like Chris King. I think he's a good guy, and I think he generally means well, and he's a smart man. But I think that. Do you feel like there was bad blood with Gwen Graham after that he didn't bring her on the ticket, and also that he could have brought somebody else on, maybe a woman in general, even if it wasn't Graham, that instead of I know we're both white, but instead of a white guy that didn't really do anything basically for the ticket, besides he was also a progressive guy.
Yeah, so I would push back a little bit on that he didn't do as much for the ticket. So Chris King, the support that Chris King has in the Black community, in the Hispanic community, in the LGBTQ circles, like these are areas where Mayor Gillum was also very strong. There were some Black churches, particularly here in Orlando, who endorsed Chris King going into the primary. They didn't even endorse Mayor Gillum. So the stuff with Congresswoman Graham, her and I have actually gotten into it on Twitter a couple of times, because she maintains this, Andrew Gillum's campaign never reached out to her to do stuff to help him get elected. My thing was, you were running for governor. You are a Democrat. it is your job,
Yeah.
regardless whether the campaign reaches out to you or not,
Right.
to get that Democrat elected.
I agree.
And do I think there was bad blood? I do, but I think it was bad blood more so in the fact that when Jeff Green got in the race and started
Yeah.
dumping all this money into negative ads against Gwen Graham and Phil Levine, Mayor Gillum just happened to be in the right spot.
Yeah.
Like, he was sitting in fourth pretty much the whole time. Well, he was sitting in third, and Jeff Green went from fifth to fourth. When you start spending money, you start moving up. And that was the thing that the other folks just couldn't compete with Jeff Green money. And, you know, I do think there was a little bit of bitterness, but I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I've seen candidates who lose and they don't accept that loss.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're like, well, this should have been mine. Well, coulda, shoulda, woulda, the voters chose somebody else.
Right.
So either get completely out of the way or get back in here and help.
Right. Well, I told Sean this, and this is about the election, Sean Shaw. I said, you know, and he told me this because first I'll say two things. So he told me in the interview that, you know, obviously there was that whack job, the Hispanic guy that was sending the bombs to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama through that Miami mail office, would shut down that office, which a lot of ballots didn't get counted coming out of that office. Now, I'm not going to say that that was the 30,000 votes that could have changed the election, but I'm sure there was quite a few damn votes that could have turned the Bill Nelson election of 10 to 12,000 votes. So I think that was an issue. He told me that there was issues in South Florida where there was a lot of white people and maybe Jewish people that skipped his name and Andrew Gillum's name and voted for the rest of the Democratic ticket down the line. And we all can know what that means. That's racism, to say the least. Did you hear anything about that also?
Yeah, there were a lot of numbers that, and here's the thing, like, I'm a numbers guy, right? Like, I care about numbers. Like, they matter a lot. And there were a lot of numbers, not even in South Florida. So, like, if you want to go back to election night, and I was in Tallahassee, you know, with the campaign.
Yeah.
And we were looking at the numbers because, you know, out in the Panhandle, like, they're an hour behind us. So we were looking at the numbers in the big counties. Orange County, like, we are phenomenal. Our supervisor of election, Bill Cowles, is amazing. We get our stuff in. I mean, we're talking 9:30.
Wow.
Everybody else is like, oh my gosh, how do we get stuff in? And then, you know, polls close at 8 o'clock, 8:30, everything is posted most of the time for Orange County.
Wow.
I mean, we are on top of it. Yeah. But I mean, it's funny. So the difference in Senator Nelson's election, the difference in, frankly, Commissioner Freed in her election, she could have sort of run up the score a little bit had some of those ballots come in and had they been Democratic ballots. But yeah, Sean Shaw and Mayor Gillum did have a lot of undervotes, which is, I mean, problematic is probably the nice way to put it. Like, it's incredibly concerning that, you know, at that point in 2018 and now in 2020, like, I mean, look at sort of how we got to where we are as a nominee. And I didn't appreciate Vice President Biden until the first debate with President Trump. And I'll say that as somebody who, I'm not anti-Biden. Like, I'm going to vote for Biden. Like, he is the nominee. But I did not appreciate the strategy and the thinking behind the vast majority of middle of the road, whether you want to call them independents, moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, who they don't want any kind of radical transformation. They want what they've always feel like they've known, and they want it to be palatable. And Joe Biden is that.
Yeah. So what's up next for you, Andrew, then?
So right now I'm focusing on my law firm, Andrew Darling Law. You can find me on all the socials. I do mostly criminal defense work. I do rights restoration, some sealings and expungements. I do very few personal injury cases. They're just no fun. But I am going to work on my law firm, building my law firm, continuing to grow my brand. I've definitely helped plenty of protest clients. I have a few protest clients now. I really care about the work that I do. And I don't know if I'm going to run for sheriff again. I don't know what I'm going to run for. I'll run for something at some point, right? It has to be the right scenario. It
Right.
has to be something that makes sense. It has to be something that's not going to put my family in a position where I'm just never going to be here.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's fair.
unfortunately, the reality is when you do get elected to a position, that's just going to take so much of your time. And my family knows that. My family's aware of that. My wife should be retiring here in 3 or 4 years. So who knows? That might be perfect time to get back on the horse and get out there and run for something.
Andrew, thanks so much for your time, and I'll definitely put all that information to find you in the at the description box. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
All right, Rob. Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.